Fantastic. Yeah, so good afternoon. My name is Prince. Most of the students, you know me because we've done a couple of sessions like this together. And apologies to the panelists because it took us a bit long to set up, but we're here now. So on this call, we have students from St. Dominic's, which is a secondary school in Shawasha, who are in the upper six. Some of them are writing their examinations this year. So we wish them all the best. And we're also part of Emergination Africa. And we also have on the panel, Danielle, who is a...
Hey everyone.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
And we also have Audrey.
Hello.
So we have some fantastic panelists who are here with us today. So we'll be talking about university applications to the UK and to the United States. So that's the main purpose of this panel session. But before we start, or before I go deep into introducing the topic, I am going to ask Danielle to introduce herself fully in terms of like what she's doing so that you guys can get to know who she is. And then we'll go to Audrey, and we'll come back to myself, and then I'll introduce the topic and we'll get started. Over to you, Danielle.
Okay. Hi everyone. Like Prince said, my name is Danielle. I'm Canadian, but I'm a student at Oxford right now, studying for an MSc in African Studies. And I also did my undergraduate degree here in the UK in English Literature and History at Durham University, which is up in the north. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about more today, is that process of applying for an undergrad in the UK and moving to the UK to study for an undergrad, because that can all be quite overwhelming. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Over to you, Audrey.
So I'm Audrey. I am a clinical psychologist in private practice. I studied psychology here in South Africa, left Zimbabwe in 2007 in order to do that, and worked in the government a little bit to also get trained, and then eventually just decided to start my own business. I believe a lot in advocacy, and I think a lot needs to be done just in terms of sharing knowledge about how to get into the profession. It is a profession that, you know, most of the time favors the privileged. And I hope that, you know, by being able to contribute to people at this level, that can also just influence them just in terms of the decisions they make. I'm joined here by an associate of mine. His name is Vincent Simelani. He was also at UJ, but he studied law.
Oh, fantastic. Can we hear from Vincent? Just a brief introduction of yourself and what you do now.
So hi everyone. As Audrey stated, I studied law at the University of Johannesburg. So I recently graduated last year. At the moment, I'm unemployed, seeking employment.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Vincent, Audrey, and Danielle, for joining us. I think, in my opinion, this is going to be a very wonderful session because we have people who have studied in different places. I've studied in the US for my bachelor's, but that's not the focus of this session. So today we're only focusing on UK and South Africa. So I'll come in here and there with my perspective on UK applications from more of a graduate level for some of you who want to do like graduate degrees here. But Danielle will focus more on the UK part of applying to undergrad universities because she has had first-hand experience with that. And Audrey and Vincent can tell us more about applying to South Africa, because some of you may want to apply to South Africa once you're done with high school. So without further ado, I will leave some time for questions, but because we started late, we might cut that time down. So maybe we'll start with like the basic question that I get, most people get interested in, and we'll start with you, Danielle. Just give us maybe a highlight of what made you choose to study in the UK, especially when you are coming from Canada, where there are a lot of good schools in Canada and maybe the US or any other place you could have studied. Like, what was special about the UK? And as you share, like, what made you decide to study in the UK, maybe also decide like what was the research process like for you to get acquainted with a country that was not your country of origin in terms of choosing where to study?
Yeah, okay. So my reason for coming to the UK was really about programs offered and about the style of teaching. And I think that's something which is very kind of central to university experience, and that's something that is important to think about, which a lot of students often don't. You kind of look at which universities are ranked highest, which ones are kind of most likely to get you a job or whatever, but not necessarily thinking about what your actual experience in the classroom is going to be. And that can definitely make or break a degree, particularly at an undergraduate level. So I think the benefit, at least for some people, certainly for me, of coming to the UK for an undergraduate degree is that class sizes tend to be smaller and you tend to get more personal attention than you would at a university, say in the US or in Canada. So like I said, I studied at Durham University, which is largely a mix of, like, for an individual class that I would be taking, it would be a mix of lectures, which would be a larger class, say 50 people. We still never had the kind of 200-person lectures that I would have had at a university ranked similarly back in Canada. But then in addition to that, we had sort of 6 to 8 person seminars, which supplemented those lectures every week. And at those is when you really got a chance to kind of discuss your ideas, discuss the readings. And I personally found that really beneficial. And I knew that going into my program. So that was something that I did sort of research and look into, which is also why I selected Durham in particular as a university, because I was aware that that kind of teaching style operated there. That said, obviously, sort of small group learning isn't for everybody, and that did also a lot of kind of personal responsibility in terms of researching on your own or whatever, which isn't for everyone. So it's all about sort of going online. All the information is online if you just do a Google search, and sort of investigating what different universities are offering in terms of teaching style, in terms of how the actual degree and courses are structured, I would say. The other big thing about just sort of choosing to study in the UK is actually moving to the UK as a country, and also selecting kind of what city you're going to live in. Because as much as the university is sort of what you're going for, you are also changing your entire life. And I was somebody who struggled a lot moving away from home. But I think I did just get lucky in that Durham was a very good match for me. But I didn't do that research going in, which for me it worked out, but it very easily could have not worked out. And my second option after Durham was Leeds, which is a very different style of city from Durham and is not somewhere that I think I would have been very happy. So that is also something to think about, is the actual location where you're going to live. And again, that kind of information is available at a preliminary level if you just sort of do a Google search and then go forward from there once you've at least narrowed your options a little bit.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing on your experience. And I found the point you raised very useful in terms of like doing your own research on Google, especially given like the location, kind of the advantages you have in a certain education system, which is like class size when it comes to the UK compared to like other universities. So that's really a good point to note. So I understand, like, we'll come back to some of the aspects you mentioned, especially pertaining to like how you deal with homesickness and things like that. So just be prepared for that. But I would like to ask you, Audrey and Vincent. So maybe we can start with you, Audrey, and go to Vincent. Just share like what circumstances led you to choose to study at University of Johannesburg, and did you already, because now I know that you're very focused on your career as a psychologist, Audrey, and did you know before, when you were like still at high school, that you wanted to be a psychologist? And did you know that you wanted to study in South Africa? And kind of what things did you consider to end up where you are and to end up choosing the career path of being a psychologist?
Thank you very much for your question. It's quite comprehensive. I'll try to answer it as best I can. So in retrospect, I realized that without realizing it, because I took a gap year prior to study, I'd been exposed to different contexts and I had an idea of the sort of environment I wanted to work in. So I already knew that I had an aptitude for the social sciences based on how I interacted with theory in high school. So your subjects that had any form of theory and that involved people, I tended to be very, interested. I also had an aptitude for the arts, just comparing them to the more technical subjects. So I already knew that whatever I needed to do had to be something that would stimulate my creativity. So when I got exposed to different contexts during my internship here, I realized that I enjoyed the social workspace, the welfare space. And so I was actually thinking, do I want to do social work or psychology? I knew I wanted to be in the helping professions. And so I had the opportunity to actually go to the UK or to the United States. And I remember at one point, I really seriously considered it. But then I started to ask myself that if the problems I want to address in my studies or the areas I'm interested in, at the time it was more like the areas I'm interested in, if they're people, maybe it would be best for me to situate myself within the African context, because I felt then I'll be able to be more relevant to African problems. So at the time it was more of, okay, look, I'm African. I think if I go to a more stable African nation, and the only thing bearing in mind that made me leave Zimbabwe was that there was, it was at the time where you would get people unable to write examinations because they didn't have funds. You'd get universities closing. So the instability wasn't ideal for me, given that I'd taken a year off already. So my mom suggested, why don't you try South Africa? And that was just, I think, quite suitable, given that it's an hour, 40 minutes away from home. It's 12 to 18 hours on the road. So I decided to go with that. Also, South Africa worked quite well. And in particular, you asked about the University of Johannesburg. What was really, interesting about South Africa was that each university, as with any place, I'm sure even in the UK to you, Danielle, they have a certain type of market that they are sort of bringing in. So UJ in particular seeks diversity, and it also seeks students that are dynamic and may not be as academic, may not be as academically competent. So it's not like your VITs and your UCTs, which are more like, the more prestigious schools that you really need to be like excellent academically. Because I know sometimes in high school, you may have that fear of what if I go to uni and I'm not as academic. So UJ actually is able to suit the students that may be more artistic, more creative, more technical. So it's diverse in that way. It's more suited to a very shifting economic context. Then the other thing as well was that, now that you mentioned field of study, I am very grateful. And as you said, I am focused in my career, but I feel very, very privileged, because I do feel like, given that I'm in South Africa, I still do have a base to make contact with Zimbabwe and be influential and not really feel like I've left. But at the same time, I do have the opportunity to go overseas to train, which I have been privileged to do. So I think this actually also brings in the aspect of competitive advantage, for a Zimbabwean, and why South Africa was fitting. I don't know what it's like for a Zimbabwean going to the UK or to the US, because my only examples are people such as yourself, Prince. But then I know for a fact that in South Africa, given the way that we've been educated as Zimbabweans, when you get into the South African context as a Zimbabwean, you tend to think more critically. And that somehow gives you an awareness that a person who's been raised within the same context or who studied within the same context, which is South Africa, may not necessarily have. So it's just a different spin off on things. Yeah, but I think to answer your question, that's pretty much my journey, you know, to say the least.
Oh, fantastic! Thanks so much. And I'm assuming here that Vincent is South African. Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic! I'm not wanting to put you on the spot, but if you want to share, like, briefly, what made you choose UJ, or like, what was your main inspiration? Like, was going to university like the obvious thing or the obvious path for you, or it's something that you had conviction about, or were you an academic, or were you more dynamic, like Audrey has put here?
So in high school, I did sciences, right? So the norm was after high school, you would perhaps follow the route of mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, because you did sciences. But the reason why I chose law is simply for two reasons. The first one being that I wanted to take something that was challenging, because in high school I was a reserved person, so I wanted something that would make me engage with people a lot, take me out of my comfort zone, basically. So, and then the other reason was simply because, well, this reasoning won't sound good, but I took it from movies. I used to like watching, you know, your attorneys representing clients in courts. So I envisioned myself being that kind of person one day. So those are my choices. And then with the UJ, why I chose UJ, it had nothing to do with status, to say is it number one, number two. I simply liked the environment when I went there to visit once.
Yeah.
So there are 4 campuses with the UJ. So I went to the main campus. It looked very beautiful. So I was like, I can see myself there one day.
Yeah.
Nothing related to whether it's the best or not. Just where I felt I would be comfortable.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And yeah, you mentioned something very good about, you know, that you're not always tied to what you study in high school, right? Because in high school, my best subject was history. Actually, I was very, very good at history and geography, but I went ahead to study computer science, and my reason for choosing computer science was because it's technology and it sounds cool, and many people are getting into technology and it's becoming the big thing, so let me go into computer science. That was just my reason. I was not good at computer science. I was probably like the 5th student or something when it comes to computer science. So it's a good point to also say, like, if you're doing art in high school or sciences or commercials, you're not stuck with that. Like, you can always envision and dream beyond what you're doing now in high school. So that's a good point. We'll get a little bit technical for about the next 10 minutes before we open for questions. And so I'll go over to you, Danielle. If you're able to just walk us through the process of applying to UK. So imagine I'm a very ambitious student who yes, could perhaps go on Google and just say, how do you apply to the UK? But I want to just benefit from this session and know the high level process of applying, like from where you start, from how the essays work. And if you can just try to distill that entire process in 2 or 3 minutes, then that'll be fantastic.
Cool. I was ready for this question. Okay, so applying to the UK for an undergraduate degree is slightly weird because it's all done through a single centralized system online called UCAS, which means that you don't apply directly to the universities that you select. All of your information, so your personal statement, your samples of written work, your references from your teachers, your grades, all of those get uploaded to UCAS, and then you're allowed to select 5 universities who will receive your UCAS application, and then choose whether or not they accept you, and then you get to decide where you want to go out of the ones that do give you an offer. So those things, the personal statement, samples of written work, and the references, that's basically what is at the heart of your UCAS application. And the one thing that I would stress very strongly, I think, that I did not do when I applied when I was 17, is to make sure that you learn as much about the UCAS system as possible, and you get as much help as possible, ideally from people based in the UK. So I had, just to give you this kind of from my personal history, my own angle, I was a very bright student in high school, like top grades in my class, and my first choice of undergraduate university was Oxford, which is sort of the top in the UK. And on paper, there's no reason why I shouldn't have at least gotten an interview at Oxford. And I didn't, because I didn't know the system. And I think that's something that's really important, is that no matter how kind of good you are, how clever you are, how well-rounded you are, you need to know how to actually get through the application process. And it is daunting, it's difficult, and you are at a disadvantage. I can say that from my own personal experience, that being outside of the UK, everyone in the UK knows the system and you don't. And it's quite likely that the people around you don't either. So I had help from teachers, I had help from my student counselor, I had people proofreading my personal statement or whatever. And it doesn't really make that much difference if they also are sort of ignorant of what the standards actually are. So my big tip, I think, to kind of get around that is just to contact the university. And that can seem like, I mean, I'm someone who doesn't like sending emails. I don't like talking to strangers. But that is honestly the best way to really get help with your application. And when I say contact the university, ideally contact a person at the university. So once you've decided that you want to apply in history, like find the head of the history department, or find someone in the history department who has an academic interest that you think sounds interesting, and just drop them an email and say, hey, like, this is who I am. I'm in the process of applying. I don't know very much about the system. Can you help me, or can you connect me with somebody who can? And I think the best approach is to sort of try to get in touch with a student in your program at the university that you're applying to. And someone in the department will be a good way to do that, to facilitate that for you. Because we've all been through it. Like, students have all been through it, and we're all happy to help. So like, we can look at personal statements, we can give advice on writing them, we can help you decide which teachers might be good to write you a reference, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so that's sort of that side of it, like, get as much help as you can. And then related to that, I would say don't, so that's sort of on the personal statement, I would say, because that is the core, that is what is most central to your application. The second thing that they really look at is samples of written work that you have to submit. So that would be, officially, that would be an essay that you've produced in one of your sort of upper level classes. And officially, you're just supposed to take a piece of work, and as it's been marked by your teacher, and send it off. That's how it works, sort of within the formal parameters. And that's what I did. Nobody in the UK does that. Everybody gets sort of feedback on the top essay they've ever written. They work on it again with their teacher, they edit it and whatever, and then it gets submitted. So, like, basically do everything that you can to give yourself an edge, because it is a competitive system. It's difficult to navigate from the outside, but there are people on the inside willing to help. And you, like, once you are in the system, it's fine. It is understandable. it's just a point of sort of getting that contact and building that relationship.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for such like comprehensive of like the entire process, because I think you did the main and important point, starting from like knowing the system, which is very important. I know in places like the US, they also have things like common application. In Zimbabwe, you apply directly to the university, and in the UK, you have this system, UCAS, which you have to actually know about. It looks like Audrey has dropped, so we may not be able to get the overview of like this process of applying to South Africa, but we can always get back to it. So yeah, what I just wanted to perhaps do is also like just state as a motivator for like applying abroad, because most of you may actually be asking like, but why would I even need to apply to abroad or in a country different from where I am? And for me, I never really thought about studying abroad, but the opportunity like got presented to me along the way. And what I've actually found now, like just reflecting upon that experience, is I now know much more about like different cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing business, different philosophies, different ways of seeing the world, just because I've been exposed and studied in different countries. Like my US experience coupled with my UK experience wouldn't have been the same as if I was, as if I had stayed at UZ or like NAST or any other school that is in Zimbabwe. And now I even have like all these different ideas that have come from inspiration of seeing like how developed some of these countries are. I know that South Africa is definitely a little more developed than Zimbabwe. That's why it's also a good motivator for people that studied UCT or FITS or UJ, because if you go to those schools, you get to see different things that are not in the country that you can go back and build in your own country, or different systems or different ways of doing things. So yeah, before we go into questions, hopefully we can get Audrey to come back up so we can kind of understand in depth the process of studying in South Africa. I would just like to maybe ask like Daniel if you have any generic advice you would give to yourself. Let's say you take a snapshot of yourself right now and you are still in high school and you were in your last year of high school. What advice would you give yourself now?
Advice about kind of applying or moving away?
About anything.
About anything.
As it pertains to taking your next step, your next leap forward towards your vision in life, or like your journey.
Okay. I think the biggest thing, especially with moving abroad, is to just kind of recognize that it's going to be scary. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have moments when you regret it, when you feel sort of culturally out of place. But it will be worth it in the end. And I think for me, so I actually didn't apply to any universities in Canada. I only applied to universities in the UK. So I didn't have the option to back out, which in hindsight is very good, because I 100% was terrified of leaving home, of moving away. And I think I would have taken the sort of get out clause if that was available to me. And yeah, like I said, it is difficult. And even for me, like you might not expect that moving from Canada to the UK would be that much of a kind of culture shock. But even at that level, I did experience it quite a lot, just like little things about how you talk, or sort of, for me, it's like I'm quite open, I'm quite emotionally open. And that's not part of the British culture. Like England is a very kind of reserved place, and I found that very difficult to navigate. But like Prince said, moving across borders like totally changes just the way that you view people, the way that you view social relationships. And it is really powerful, both on kind of an academic or a professional level, but also on a personal level. And it very much kind of changes how you see the world. And I think just on the point of kind of culture shock, one point I want to come back to, just from the perspective of choosing what university you want to go to or apply to. It is also worth thinking, I think, about where you will feel most welcome, where you will feel like you sort of have the support network that you need. So if you have a friend or a classmate who is also applying, or if you have family somewhere abroad, that is worth taking into account. I'm not saying that that should be kind of the only thing going into your decision making, because obviously you don't want to plan your life around your best friend in high school, but it can make those experiences a whole lot easier and a whole lot more comfortable, especially when things do get difficult.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much for that. I think it's very important points on just making sure that like you can navigate this space and getting the right exposure by crossing different borders and understanding like the cultural differences and understanding the cultural shock that you can go through. So I think those are all points to note. So before we move on to questions, which if you guys have any specific questions over at St. Dominic's pertaining to knowing what Oxford is like, because I know that Daniel, you're studying in Oxford, and I'm also studying in Oxford. So if you want to understand like those kinds of dynamics, and also maybe if you have any questions about the actual process of applying to the UK, I know a little bit about South Africa, so perhaps I can also come in and answer the questions. But for now, let's have one of you guys unmute your microphone from the laptop, and then we'll open up to a few questions. If you also have like general questions about the weather in the UK, which I think is an interesting thing. Like you also have to consider, right? Because yeah, I think we'll take questions. Any questions, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, so just introduce yourself and what you are studying again, and where you would like to study prospectively.
Okay, so my name is Kimberly Champwana Shalifa, and I'm studying maths, biology, and chemistry, and I hope to become a chemical engineer. So my question is, just like how in the US you need SATs and South Africa you need ABTs, do you need a certain type of exam to apply to the UK?
Yeah, okay, really good question. It depends on the university and it depends on the program. And I mean, I'm a history student, so I can only kind of advise on that, but I know that Oxford required an entry exam for history and other universities didn't. So, but that is something that will be laid out very clearly on a sort of application prospectus. So if you say you were applying to University College London for chemical engineering, if you search that online, you'll find a kind of summary sheet really easily that will say, these are sort of the grades that we expect, and then these are all the other components of the application. And if there's an entry exam, it will be listed there. coming back to what I said earlier, just quickly about sort of getting as much help as you can, do that for entry exams as well. Because again, that's something that I didn't do. And like looking back, my history entry exam for Oxford was horrible. Like just the way I answered it, not that it was bad, it was just, I wrote it as a Canadian in a Canadian system. I didn't sort of tailor it to what the UK academic system is like. So that is just something to be conscious of.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. Like on the, I think entry exams are interesting because you find out that to do your undergrad, which is your first degree, you have a lot of like entry exams for different things. But once you progress to like masters, sometimes masters, you still have a lot of entry exams. But when you progress to a more advanced degree, they won't ask you for entrance exams. Now they ask for like other things, like what is your statement of purpose and things like that. We'll get to that later. Next question.
Can I just add one more thing? On the topic of entry exams, it is important to kind of think in advance of what you want to apply for and if there is an entry exam. Just because you do have to sit the exam at a certain time of year or in certain settings, that can kind of affect the timing of your application. So do just kind of check that well before you actually want to start at a university, because it's possible you could have to take the exam an entire year in advance. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. I think we can go to the next question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Leslie, and I'm currently studying Divinity, History, and Literature here at St. Dominic's High School. And I would just like to know generally, what are my chances of getting a job after I study in the UK as a Zimbabwean citizen?
Sorry, Leslie, can you just clarify like what field you are thinking of going into?
I'm interested in going into law, specifically international relations.
Okay.
Would you like to go for this one, Daniel?
Pardon?
Would you like to go answer this one?
Yeah, I could try. So do you mean getting a job in the UK? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I would say it's difficult, but not impossible. And one of the good things about the UK is that they actually have very good kind of graduate schemes to get people into industry right away. So having done a law degree, you can apply to sort of get fast-tracked into the legal service, and if you can get one of these grad schemes, that's going to get you into it fairly fluidly, which is a system that that I haven't really encountered anywhere else in the world. Like, it's certainly not something we have back in Canada. And there are also very good summer internship opportunities in the UK, which can give you that kind of competitive edge and that experience as well, which, again, like, we have nothing like that back home. So I think that is actually a strong point in the UK, particularly if you're doing something like law that does have an obvious career trajectory. Yeah, Prince, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree completely with what you've mentioned, but I've always found it like difficult to, in general, it's difficult to get a job in a different country that you're not born, in general. But then some countries are easier than others. I know that in the UK, to get a job that you trained for, you have to qualify, especially if you're going into things like law. You have to to get some accreditations pertaining to that area in the country. So I know people who have done like medical degrees in Sudan, in South Africa, but they cannot practice in the UK, although there's a high demand for doctors. So what they have to do is they have to write some exams which are pertaining to the UK, and after they do that, they can then work for the for different UK companies. But also, like, it's not totally impossible. Sometimes it's how resourceful you are as a person. I know that when I was in the US, I was trying to get a job after graduation in the US. A lot of the people I graduated with no offers of jobs. There are no jobs at all. Then a few of us were a bit more resourceful and a bit more like on task about looking for opportunities, talking to people, talking to different mentors and sponsors, had like 2 or 3 offers. So all of those factors also come in on this. I hope you managed to answer the question adequately.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other questions, guys?
No more questions.
Oh, no more questions.
Well understood.
Okay, fantastic. So let's give Danielle a hand, myself a hand, yourself a hand. Okay, so are you guys yeah, so thanks so much guys for this session. I look forward to seeing some of you at the Distinguished Speaker Series this Thursday. Who is coming?
All of us.
Fantastic, yeah. So it will be really fun stuff. We have some really cool speakers who will be at the event. So you guys are gonna have a blast. But otherwise, thanks so much and good luck on your studying. Good luck on your exams. If you have any questions, reach out to Russell, Farai, or myself. You already have my email. And then if you have any questions you want Danielle to answer at a later time, I can always forward those to her as well. But besides that, thanks so much. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck.
Thank you. Bye.